My name is Vanessa Cole, and 3 days after my mother's funeral, I found out I had been erased from her will. Not overlooked. Erased, like I never existed. I was her only daughter. The one who clipped her fingernails when her hands trembled. The one who filled out her Medicare forms, cleaned out her pill bottles, who stayed up at 3 a.m. while she cried from the pain of late-stage breast cancer. But when the lawyer read the will aloud, I wasn't in it. Not even a sentence. Not even a scrap. Everything in the house, the savings, the life insurance, even the sapphire necklace she swore she'd give me on my wedding day, was left to my older brother, Mason, who had moved out at 21 and never looked back. Mason, who called Mom maybe twice a year, usually drunk and needing a wire transfer. Mason, who told me during the funeral reception, "You've always been too emotional, Ness. That's why you don't get it." I didn't get it? No, I got it all too clearly. The lawyer's office was cold, one of those modern spaces with steel frames and echoing marble floors. I remember tracing the corner of the leather chair I was sitting in, grounding myself while Mason skimmed through the documents like he was scanning a grocery list. He didn't even look surprised. That's when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned. My mouth was dry, but I asked anyway. Did she really sign this? He shrugged. She was of sound mind. It's all notarized. Don't make this into something it's not. But it already was. It was betrayal, the kind that doesn't scream. It slices. Quiet, surgical, right where it hurts the most. That night I drove back to the house, her house, my childhood home. The porch light was still flickering from the storm the week before. The kitchen smelled faintly of her rose tea. Everything looked the same. But I didn't belong there anymore. Legally, it wasn't mine. Emotionally, it never stopped being mine. I sat in her recliner and didn't turn on the lights. Just stared into the dark, letting my mind unravel. The memories poured in, her laugh echoing in that very room, her slippers scuffing down the hallway, how she used to hum while folding laundry. And the worst part? I had no idea she'd done this. No warning. No change in tone. No, we need to talk. A moment. She died with me thinking I was her anchor. Her person. But somewhere between the chemo appointments and the estate planning, she decided I was nothing. The next morning, Mason came by. Unannounced, smug. "You'll have to move out by the end of the month," he said, tossing me a cardboard box like he was doing me a favor. "I'll give you time. I'm not a monster. Not a monster. Just a thief in a tailored jacket." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just looked him in the eye and said, "I hope you enjoyed winning." Because the game hadn't even started yet. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to fight him with emotion. I was going to learn everything he'd done, everything he'd lied about, every signature, every phone call, every quiet manipulation. And I was going to take everything back, piece by piece. Without ever raising my voice. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake on the floor, not the bed, because I didn't want to pretend anything was normal anymore. By sunrise, I had already made a list. Not of things to pack. Of things to prove. I started with the will. I requested a certified copy from the probate court the moment their office opened. While I waited, I drove to the funeral home. The director there, Carla, had known my mother for years. We even attended the same church once. She looked nervous when I asked, but after a moment of silence, she nodded and said, "Your brother handled the paperwork. He brought everything in before your mom passed." Before, I felt a strange kind of pressure in my chest, like my ribs were trying to remember how to protect me. My mother had been in hospice for 6 weeks. Barely lucid for the last 10 days. And Mason submitted her will before she died. I thanked Carla, held back the sting in my throat, and walked out to the parking lot. I didn't cry. I just sat in my car, engine off, and stared at the steering wheel for what felt like an hour. That afternoon, I finally got the certified will from the court. It was notarized, yes, but not by anyone I recognized. And my mother's signature? Slanted. Uneven, nothing like the careful cursive she always used. I remembered her handwriting so vividly from the little sticky notes she left for herself. Doctor at 10. Vanessa's birthday next week. Call cable company. This signature looked rushed. Shaky, but not in a way that matched her. Tremors. It looked, Coach, I called my cousin Marcy that night, Mom's niece, and the only person I trusted in the family. She used to work in elder care. When I told her what I'd found, she went quiet. I was with her the weekend before. She passed, Marcy said. She told me you were getting the house. Said Mason didn't need anything from her. That was the moment something in me turned. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was ready. I took unpaid leave from the clinic where I worked as a registered nurse. I said I had family matters to settle, which wasn't a lie. I moved into a cheap short-term rental across town, because Mason had already changed the locks at the house, and then, I started reading. I read every article I could on will fraud, undue influence, elder financial abuse, power of attorney manipulation, estate law, anything that could apply. I watched lectures on YouTube from probate attorneys. I joined forums, emailed paralegals, even asked questions anonymously on Reddit. It turns out there were patterns or red flags. A will updated right before death. A caregiver or family member who benefits exclusively. A previously promised heir. Suddenly cut out. A notarization without a lawyer present. Inconsistent handwriting. Witnesses with personal ties to the new beneficiary. Mason had no idea who he was dealing with. I tracked down the notary listed on the will. Her name was Tasha Bennett. A mobile notary service in town. I called her, asked her directly, do you remember notarizing a will for Margaret Cole 2 months ago? Long pause. Then, I do a lot of notarizations. I'd have to check. She was already lying. I sent a formal request for her logbook entry under the Notary Public Records Act. When it came, it listed 2 witnesses, Mason's college buddy and his live-in girlfriend. Not neutral parties. Not independent. Not even. Closed up. By the end of that week, I had a folder the size of a college textbook. And that's when I scheduled my consultation. Attorney Lynette Farrow. Estate law specialist. 40 years of experience, known for being cool as granite and just as sharp. Her receptionist warned me she was selective. Lynette listened to me for 20 minutes without speaking. Then she asked, do you have the original will? I pulled it from my folder. She flipped through the pages like a surgeon reviewing a chart before operating. You have a case, she said calmly. And it's stronger than most. I didn't smile. I just nodded. Because I hadn't come for comfort. I came to reclaim what was mine. The first thing Lynette did was file a petition to contest the will, citing potential fraud, undue influence, and lack of capacity. I signed the paperwork with a hand that no longer trembled. Mason didn't know it yet, but the game board had shifted. Lynette warned me, he'll be served. It'll get ugly. Be ready for that. I wasn't doing this to get back at him emotionally. I had buried that version of myself with my mother. I was doing this to expose what he had done. To correct the lie he thought he could cement into history. 3 days later, Mason called me for the first time since he tossed me that cardboard box. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, real classy, Vanessa. I hope you know you're destroying her memory with this. Just let it go. Let it go. That's what people say when they're used to getting away with things. I didn't respond. But Lynette did. She drafted and mailed a formal cease and desist letter warning Mason not to dispose of any assets, enter into sale agreements, or make modifications to the estate until the court heard our petition. She also filed a motion for injunctive relief, requesting the house be frozen, no sales, no leases, no transfers, until the case was resolved. It worked. The court approved the injunction. Pending investigation. That same week, I started reaching out to people who had been close to my mom during her final year. Her hospice nurse, Sandra. Her neighbor, Geraldine. Even the lady who ran her church's knitting club. I didn't tell them what I suspected. I just asked them to remember. To tell me about the last time they saw her. What she said. How she looked. A pattern emerged. Confusion. Fatigue. Struggles with memory. Sandra said she didn't even know Mom had signed a new will. She barely had the strength to hold a spoon, she whispered. I would have never believed she was updating legal documents. Geraldine told me Mom had cried on her porch 2 weeks before she passed. Said she was afraid of being pressured into something, but wouldn't elaborate. I documented every statement. Every name. Every date. Lynette said they could be used as affidavits, but it wasn't just about Mom's capacity. It was about Mason's manipulation. I remembered the time he showed up late one evening while Mom was sleeping, said he just needed to grab some old paperwork from her filing cabinet. I remembered how he asked me to go run and pick up takeout while he stayed with her. I was gone 40 minutes. Long enough to plant documents. Long enough to get her to sign something when no one else was looking. That memory hit me like a sucker punch. I had trusted him. Even then. Even after everything, the next move was bold. Lynette subpoenaed phone records, including text messages between Mason and the notary, Mason and his girlfriend, and Mason and their mutual friend, the two witnesses to the new will that it was legal. And what we found was damning texts from 2 days before the notarization. Make sure she signs before Sunday. Nurse said she might not last the week. She won't remember. Shh. *T. Just get it on paper. You be the witness, Tiff can do the second. Keep it in the family. I stared at the screen in silence. Then I forwarded it to Marcy, who replied with just 3 words, burn him down. The next hearing was set for 3 weeks later. And Mason, smug, cocky, unprepared, walked in like the prince of the estate. He didn't even bring his own lawyer. Just wore that navy blue suit he always used for job interviews and bad apologies. Lynette didn't flinch. She submitted the texts, the affidavits, the medical records showing my mother's cognitive decline. And then, with surgical precision, she explained to the judge why this will needed to be suspended pending formal investigation. The judge nodded slowly. Given the evidence submitted, I'm granting a stay on estate execution until the matter is fully reviewed. All parties are ordered not to dispose of or move any estate assets. Mason looked at me for the first time in weeks. Not with mockery. With fear. I didn't smile. Because this wasn't the win. This was just the warning shot. The moment I walked out of the courthouse, I didn't feel triumph. I felt clarity. Clarity that this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about correction. About telling the truth when everyone else hoped I'd stay quiet. Mason had always relied on silence. On Mom being too tired. On me being too emotional. On the world letting him slide because he dressed well and smiled at the right people. Not this time. Lynette said we had enough for a formal fraud investigation, but it would take time. I told her I wasn't in a hurry. What mattered was that the gears had started turning, slowly, precisely, and in my favor. In the meantime, I dug deeper. I requested copies of Mom's medical evaluations from her last 6 months. I had signed off as her health proxy, so the documents were still accessible. The reports were heartbreaking. Each month showed steady decline, reduced memory retention, increased confusion, hallucinations near the end. The cherry on top? A note from her doctor, dated 10 days before the notarization. Patient is mentally and physically incapable of making independent legal decisions. Recommend full family oversight and cognitive care. That report alone could have nullified any will change. Meanwhile, Mason had gone quiet, which, in his case, was more dangerous than noise. I started hearing whispers from mutual friends. He was telling people I had snapped, that I was dragging our mother's memory through the mud, that I was jealous of his caretaking. Caretaking? He hadn't even been in the house the last 6 weeks unless he needed something notarized in secret. Then came the day he crossed a line. I got a call from my old neighbor, Mrs. Kravitz, who still lived 2 doors down from the Family home. Your brother brought a realtor into the house, she said. Told her he was listing it next week. My blood ran cold and I immediately contacted Lynette, who nearly laughed when I told her. Well, then he just violated a court order. She drafted and filed a motion for contempt that very afternoon. The judge called an emergency hearing. This time, Mason came with a lawyer, a red-faced man who looked like he'd just found out who his client really was. The judge didn't waste time. He read the realtor's statement. Read the injunction. Then looked straight at Mason. You were told, explicitly, not to interfere with the estate assets. Mason stammered. I didn't sell anything. You attempted to. That's enough. The judge fined him and officially appointed a temporary estate executor, someone neutral, someone legal, and most importantly, not him. I almost laughed when Mason's lawyer muttered under his breath, Jesus, you never told me about the texts. Outside the courtroom, Mason caught up to me. For the first time, his mask slipped. You're ruining everything. I turned to him. No, I said, voice flat. You ruined it the moment you thought I'd roll over. He walked off without another word. Cowards don't argue when the truth is louder than their lies, but even with momentum on my side, the emotional toll was mounting. I had moved 3 times in 5 months. My job had given me one last extension, but I knew my leave was running out. I lived off savings, spent nights surrounded by boxes, notes, timelines, court documents. I kept a sticky note on the fridge, she didn't die to be erased. It kept me steady. Then came the best twist yet. I got a call from the temporary estate executor. There's something you should see, she said. Apparently, when organizing the house files, they'd found a safety deposit box key taped under a drawer. The bank account was still active. And inside that box, a handwritten will. Undated. Unwitnessed, but detailed, in my mother's handwriting. It named me the sole beneficiary. It wasn't legally binding, but it was damning evidence of intent. Lynette's eyes lit up when she saw it. This won't win the case alone, she said, but it'll bury any argument about motive. We scanned it, submitted it to the court, and attached corroborating statements from Marcy and Geraldine, who both recalled Mom talking about updating her will just weeks before she passed. By this point, Mason had stopped showing up to hearings. His lawyer was now representing him solo, and doing it badly. But I didn't care about him anymore. I cared about the truth. And brick by brick, we were building it. The next move was surgical. Lynette filed a motion to depose the notary, Tasha Bennett, under oath. It was time to hear her lie to a court reporter, not just dodge my questions over the phone. When the deposition date arrived, I watched through the glass as Tasha walked in, clearly rattled. She had 2 folders in her hand and a purse that looked like it had been clawed through in a panic. She sat down across from Lynette with her lawyer, a younger man who looked like he'd only recently passed the bar. Lynette's tone was calm, deliberate, as she asked the opening question, can you confirm the date you notarized the will for Margaret Cole? Tasha hesitated. I believe it was August 16th? Lynette raised an eyebrow. Your logbook says August 14th. Tasha blinked. Oh. Right. Must have mixed it up. Would you say your memory of this notarization is clear? I mean, mostly? Lynette leaned forward, folding her hands. Ms. Bennett, are you aware that the testator was in palliative hospice care and had been declared cognitively incapacitated just 2 days before this notarization? Silenced. Tasha's lawyer tried to object, but Lynette cut him off smoothly. This is not speculative. The medical report is dated, signed, and entered into the record. I'm asking Ms. Bennett if she understood the condition of the signer at the time of notarization. Tasha began to crumble. Her voice got thin. I just did what I was asked. I didn't know she was that sick. Lynette didn't blink. Who contacted you for the appointment? Mason Cole. Did you have any prior relationship with him? We'd met before. I notarized some documents for him last year. There it was. A pattern. A connection. Pre-existing familiarity, a violation of her neutral position as a notary in this matter. The deposition ended with Tasha visibly sweating, her voice cracking on the last few answers. I walked out of that room and didn't look back. The cracks were now visible to everyone. 2 weeks later, Lynette filed a full petition to invalidate the will based on fraud, undue influence, and mental incapacity. Attached were the deposition transcript, medical records, witness statements, the handwriting sample from Mom's original letters, the contents of the safety deposit box, and then came the day that turned everything. The court set a full evidentiary hearing, meaning the judge would hear everything and either uphold or throw out the will. No more motions. No more preliminaries. Just the truth, on record. Mason didn't show up. His lawyer tried to delay, citing a personal family emergency, but the judge had grown tired. Motion denied. Lynette presented for 2 straight hours. She walked the court through the timeline. Methodically, without drama, from the decline of my mother's health to the last-minute will, to the signatures, to the notary's admissions, to the contradictory witness statements. Then she handed over the handwritten letter from the safety box. My client isn't asking the court to reward emotion, Lynette said. She's asking the court to uphold integrity. The judge didn't take long. In light of the overwhelming evidence, he said, this court finds the will dated August 14 to be invalid. The estate will proceed under intestate succession, with priority given to the next of kin, Vanessa Cole. I didn't react. Not in the courtroom. Not even when the gavel hit the wood. It wasn't a movie moment. It was quieter than that. More sacred. Afterward, I walked outside and sat on the courthouse steps. Lynette joined me, sipping from her thermos. Like it was any other Tuesday. You just reclaimed your mother's legacy, she said. No, I said, looking up at the clouds. I just stopped someone from stealing it. The house was mine again. So was the insurance. The savings. The photos. The closet full of memories, but more than anything, the truth was mine. And that was the part Mason could never take. The judgment was final, but the cleanup had just begun. Even after the court ruled in my favor, the estate was a mess. Mason had already started pawning things, heirlooms, antiques, even my dad's vintage record player. Gone. Vanished without a trace. The executor called it unauthorized dispersal of assets. I called it theft. But Lynette reminded me, we don't chase ghosts. We freeze what's left. She filed a motion for restitution, requesting that the court calculate the value of what Mason had liquidated and charge it against his personal assets. That meant his car, his condo, even his savings, what little he had, were now open targets for recovery. When the sheriff's notice was delivered to his door, Mason finally called me. I didn't pick up. He tried again. And again. And finally, left a voicemail, you got your damn house. What more do you want? I sat in silence, listening to his voice crack at the end. He thought this was about the house. But it never was. It was about the lie. The quiet, entitled erasure. The way he looked at me across that lawyer's table like I should accept being discarded. Now, he'd finally been held accountable. Legally. Publicly. When I stepped back into the house, it's my house. It felt smaller. Not in a bad way. In a grounded, real way. I walked the halls barefoot. No furniture. Just dust outlines where things used to be. It was empty, but it was honest. I opened the closet in Mom's bedroom. Found a box I didn't recognize, pushed all the way to the back. Inside, handwritten letters. Birthday cards. Old receipts from lunch dates we used to share. At the bottom, a yellowed envelope. My name on the front. Inside was a letter. Not notarized. Not legal. Just personal. Vanessa, if you're reading this, I didn't get a chance to say what I should have. You've always been the one who showed up. The one who stayed. I may not have said it enough, but I saw you. I loved you. You made me proud every day. Mom, I sat on the floor and let myself cry. Not for what was lost, but for what was finally seen. 3 weeks later, the restitution claim was granted. Mason owed nearly $48,000 in recovered assets. He couldn't pay it. His condo went on the market. His bank accounts were levied. His car was repossessed. Lynette called it poetic justice. I called it closure, but still, people talked. Mutual friends, cousins, distant family members, they had opinions. That's family. You didn't have to go so far. She's grieving, she didn't know what she was doing. I learned to stop explaining. Let them twist themselves into knots justifying the man they thought they knew. I had the receipts, the files, the recordings, the court transcripts. I didn't need their approval. I had something better. Peace. The house slowly came back to life. New furniture. A fresh coat of paint. Light through clean windows. But I kept the old curtains in Mom's room. She made them herself. I never touched that closet. Her words stayed. There, folded between memory and forgiveness. One evening, I was washing dishes when I saw a car slow roll past the house. It was Mason's old sedan, the one he'd lost. He was in the passenger seat now. Someone else was driving. He didn't stop. Just looked. And I looked back. No anger. No heat, just the cold, clean stare of someone he underestimated one too many times. I never saw Mason in person again after that slow crawl past the house. Word got around that he'd left town. Moved in with some woman he barely knew in another state. Started telling people he'd been cheated out of the estate by a greedy sister with a lawyer fetish. Let him talk. The truth was filed, stamped, and entered into public record. He could write a novel, the facts wouldn't change. Still, it surprised me how quiet things became after the war ended. There were no congratulations. No parade. No late-night phone calls from family saying, "We were wrong about you." Mostly silence. And a few stiff smiles from cousins at a wedding who didn't dare ask how I was. I learned to live with that. Because I hadn't done this to be loved. I had done this to never be erased again. I went back to work at the clinic. My boss gave me a long look and said, "You've got that ice in your veins now." I just smiled. I prefer to call it clarity. My patients didn't know the story. They only knew Nurse Cole was back, calm, focused, and a little sharper around the edges. The only person who asked what really happened was a woman I treated for months. A quiet, elderly woman named Margaret, same name as my mother. She waited until the other nurses were gone and whispered, "My son keeps asking me to change my will. Says he knows what's best. What do you think I should do?" I took her hand. "You should write down exactly what you want. Make sure someone who loves you helps you do it. And don't let anyone rush you. Ever." She nodded, her eyes wet. "I knew I liked you," she said. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just rebuilding a house. I was rebuilding a sense of honor. Quiet. Practical. Unshakable. The legal dust settled slowly. Mason's lawyer eventually negotiated a reduced payment plan for the restitution, one he could barely keep up with. He defaulted within 3 months. Lynette filed to garnish his wages. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about writing the truth on his ledger in permanent ink. I donated a portion of the recovered funds to my mom's old church, in her name. I didn't leave a note. I didn't need a plaque. I just wanted one good thing to come from all the lies. Then, late one Thursday night, a knock came at the door. It was Tasha Bennett, the notary. She looked exhausted. Her hair tied back, eyes red. "I shouldn't be here," she said. But I needed to say something. I stood there, silent. She took a shaky breath. I was scared. He made it sound like no big deal. Just a favor. Said she wanted it. But when I saw her, she didn't even know what day it was. I didn't say a word. Tasha continued. "I lost my license. I might be charged. I deserved It. But I wanted you to know, I'm sorry. I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't lying, and for the first time in months, I felt a small, sharp flicker of something I thought I'd buried under court documents and strategy. Compassion. You were used, I said. But you let it happen. She nodded. I know. I closed the door gently behind her, not to shut her out, but to end it, that chapter. That grief. That wound. I was no longer the daughter who got erased. I was the woman who rewrote the record. A month after Tasha showed up at my door, I got an envelope in the mail, thick, stamped, and formal. It was from the state's Office of Notary Discipline. Inside was a notice confirming Tasha's license had been permanently revoked. She had also agreed to testify in any future estate-related disputes as part of a plea agreement to avoid criminal charges. I read the letter twice. Then folded it. Slid it into the back of my case file, and walked into the kitchen like it was just another Thursday. Because it was. Because I had one, not in the way people imagine, with balloons or headlines. But in the quiet, cold process of justice. A process that leaves no fingerprints but writes truth in ink. I started repairing the house room by room. Not to restore the past. To reclaim it, the living room where Mom used to sit with her knitting, I turned it into a reading nook. Her old bedroom, I left untouched, except for changing the linens and putting fresh wildflowers on the nightstand each Sunday. It wasn't a shrine. It was respect. One day, while pulling up the rotting floorboards in the back den, I found something I hadn't expected, an old lockbox, rusted at the hinges, pushed behind the wall frame. Inside, receipts, old tax records, and a cassette tape. Labeled, in her handwriting, for Vanessa, if you ever wonder why. I didn't have a tape player anymore. So I borrowed one from the thrift store downtown and sat on the floor. Letting the static hum come to life, then her voice, hey, sweetheart. If you're hearing this, then I probably didn't say enough in person. I know life got complicated. And I know I didn't always protect you the way I should have. But I want you to know. I always saw your heart. You gave more than anyone. And I hope this house reminds you that you matter. I sat in that silence for a long time after it ended. Not crying. Not shaking. Just existing in the stillness. That was my reward, clarity. Vindication. A mother's voice cutting through betrayal. Like sunlight through clouds, eventually, I transferred the house into a living trust, in my own name. Lynette walked me through it step by step. No loopholes. No gaps. No, Mason, you're securing your legacy, she said. No, I replied. I'm making sure no one erases mine. I started seeing life in longer timelines. I enrolled in weekend law classes, estate planning and elder protection, not to become a lawyer, but to understand the system that almost stole everything from me. To know how to wield it like a scalpel, not a club, because there were more women like me. I knew it. Women who'd been told to let it go, move on, don't tear the family apart. But what if the family already did the tearing? What if silence was just another name for surrender? One day, I'll teach a class. Maybe start a support group. Help someone else document their story, track their receipts, build their timeline, freeze those accounts, because sometimes revenge isn't fire. It's ice. It's paperwork. It's never needing to raise your voice again. It took me a long time to understand what had really been stolen, not just my name on a piece of paper. Not just the house. But the quiet trust that family would protect you when it mattered most, and once that trust is gone, something inside you reorganizes. Not violently. Strategically, I started keeping things in folders. Printed copies of everything. Bank statements, conversations, notarized affidavits, even my will, which I updated with surgical precision. I named no one from my bloodline as executor. It went to my attorney, with backup copies lodged with the county and the state bar association, because if I had to crawl through hell to reclaim what was mine, no one was ever going to put me back in the fire. One afternoon, I got a message from my cousin Trina. Haven't talked in years, she was always closer to Mason's Side of the family. She asked if we could meet. Said she had some things she needed to say. I agreed, with one condition: public place, mid-afternoon, and I'd be recording the conversation. She blinked when I pulled out my phone at the cafe, placed it on the table, and hit record. No offense, I said, sipping my tea, but I don't do whispered apologies anymore. To her credit, she didn't flinch. I just wanted to say I believed him, she said. I believed you were unstable. That you were exaggerating. But I read the court filings last week. I saw the text messages. The notary statement. And I was wrong. I didn't respond right away, because apologies are easy. What matters is what people do with the truth once they see it. She swallowed hard. I cut you off when you needed people. I was scared of making waves. I let him lie, and I stayed quiet because it was easier. I'm sorry. Still, I waited. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I just wanted to say it out loud. That I could respect. Good, I replied. Now keep saying it. To the rest of the family. Let them hear it from someone other than me. She nodded, teary-eyed, and slid a sealed envelope across the table. I found this at my mom's house. Aunt Margaret wrote it. I think it was meant for you. I didn't open it there. I waited until I was home. Alone. Safe inside, a photo of my mother and me, smiling on the porch in late spring, the year before the cancer came back. And a small, folded note: don't let the noise bury your truth. You've always had the stronger voice, even when you didn't use it. I taped it to the inside of my kitchen cabinet, where only I could see it, every morning. A reminder. Not of pain, but of who I became because of it. The months passed. The house filled with new life, music, fresh paint, windows that didn't stick, mornings where I brewed tea without bracing for another betrayal. People started asking how I moved on. I told them the truth: I didn't move on. I moved forward. There's a difference. One pretends the past didn't happen. The other turns it into armor. It was almost a year to the day since my mother passed when I finally stepped into a courtroom again, not for my case, but for someone else's. I had met Elena through a local estate planning support group. She was 38, newly widowed, and battling her late husband's family over guardianship of their autistic son. They were trying to paint her as emotionally unstable so they could take control of the trust left behind, money that was meant for the boy. I recognized the tactics immediately. Guilt. Gaslighting. Legal manipulation. And that ever-familiar phrase: you're being too emotional. I sat in the back of that courtroom and watched her take the stand, voice shaking but spine straight. I watched her hold up phone records, play recordings of her in-laws threatening her, cite educational records and custody terms. I watched her win. Afterward, she saw me outside the courthouse and just collapsed into a hug. I almost gave up, she whispered. I thought they'd win. I leaned back and looked her in the eye. They almost always do, until someone teaches them you read the fine print too. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not really. It was about teaching women like us that the law wasn't just a weapon for the powerful. It could be our armor. 2. If we knew where to look. That evening, I stood in the backyard of my home, yes, my home, and watched the garden bloom under the amber light of sunset. I had planted nothing extravagant. Tomatoes. Basil. A few snapdragons by the fence. But it was mine. The birds were louder now. Or maybe I just wasn't numbing everything out anymore. I didn't need approval. I didn't crave closure. I had built something better. Boundaries. One of my coworkers asked if I'd ever write a book about everything that happened. I told her no. Books need endings. But this wasn't an ending. This was a foundation. I looked through old photos of my mother and finally saw her face without the bitterness, not because it had disappeared, but because I had unfolded the full story. Pain. Love. Mistakes. Regret. And an unspoken trust that I would one day understand why she couldn't fight back, but I still could. A week later, I stood in front of the mirror with a clean blazer on and walked into my first night class as a guest speaker. Topic: Protecting Your Voice, A Nurse's Guide to Inheritance Fraud and Estate Defense. 10 women showed up. All of them older than me. All of them wide-eyed. All of them carrying some invisible bruise from being told they were overreacting. I taught them how to document, how to track assets, how to ask the right questions, how to freeze a bank account, request a logbook from a notary, draft a cease and desist. I gave them folders. I gave them templates. But more than that, I gave them permission to not be polite, to not explain themselves, to speak cold, clear facts like knives. When I walked out of that classroom, the night air felt lighter. Not because the world had changed, but because I had become the change I once needed. The day I received the final estate closure papers, I didn't open them right away. They sat on my kitchen table for 3 hours, sealed, silent, waiting. I made tea, watered the basil, let the silence stretch long enough for the past to echo one last time. When I finally broke the seal, the letter had read in the estate of Margaret Cole, final distribution, complete executor, Vanessa Cole. There it was. The truth. Signed, sealed, and bound by law. It wasn't about the money. Not anymore. It was about that last line, executor, Vanessa Cole, the daughter they tried to erase. The woman who wrote herself back in with facts, law, and ice in her veins. I made a copy and filed it in my drawer, between my passport and my own living trust. Then I lit a candle and burned the original. Not out of spite, but as a ritual. Closure, done my way. People asked what I planned to do with the house now that everything was over. Some assumed I'd sell it. Others assumed I'd keep it as a relic, but I had something else in mind. A transformation. I cleared out the back den, where Mason had once tried to sneak in with a real estate agent, and turned it into a private office. Painted the walls soft gray. Hung a small brass plaque on the door, cold files and war stories. That's where I started my side business, estate support for women going through contested wills, elder abuse cases, probate disputes. Not legal advice, but strategy consulting. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew the systems. I knew the red flags. And I knew the silence most women sat in before everything fell apart. I charged low fees, just enough to keep the lights on. But every case I took felt personal. There was Jessica, who found out her stepfather secretly refinanced her dead mother's house without telling her. Marla, whose brother forgot to disclose their father's second will. And Andrea, who was told by her aunt's lawyer that if women shouldn't worry about paperwork, just grieve. I taught them how to worry. How to grieve with a paper trail. How to freeze a fraud in motion. One of them asked me, "Don't you get tired of fighting?" I shook my head. No. Because I already survived the war. Now I just teach other women where to aim. I didn't need to win every case. But I needed women to stop believing they had to be nice while being erased. I started getting invited to small events, workshops, panels, nursing conferences. They always introduced me the same way: Vanessa Cole, survivor, strategist, executor of truth. And I'd stand there, calm as stone, and say, "I'm not here to give you hope. I'm here to give you tools. Because hope is soft. But evidence? Evidence is unshakable, and every woman deserves to know the difference." The day I testified at the Elder Fraud Prevention Summit, I wore the same black blazer I'd worn to my first hearing. It still fit. Only now, I did too. The room was filled with lawyers, nurses, social workers, professionals who spent their lives straddling the line between care and protection. I wasn't there as a victim. I was there as a case study that spoke for itself. I walked to the podium, placed my notes down, and said, "My name is Vanessa Cole. I'm a registered nurse, a daughter, and the executor of a story that nearly got rewritten without me." You could hear the shift in the air. Even the lawyers stopped scrolling their phones. I told them about the signs they often miss: the notary with a relationship to the beneficiary, the sudden, last-minute will change, the signature that doesn't match 3 decades of Christmas cards, the adult children who smile too much at the lawyer's table but never once visited the hospital bed, and then I told them about the aftermath, how women like me aren't looking for pity. We're looking for precision. We don't want comfort. We want compliance. Afterward, a woman in her 60s approached me, estate planner, gray streaks in her hair, soft cardigan and sharper eyes. She leaned in and said, "I've read every statute in the book, but you just gave us the one thing none of them cover, how it actually feels when they try to erase you." I nodded. Because that was it, wasn't it? The system sees paper. But we lived the silence. The phone calls not returned. The keys changed. The room we packed for our mother now emptied and handed over to a liar in a suit. Later that night, I sat in my car outside the courthouse, the same one where Mason had once swaggered through like he owned the world, and I smiled for the first time in weeks, not because I was happy, but because I was rooted. Grief had turned to fire. Fire had turned to law. And law had turned to something cleaner, power without noise. That weekend, I got a call from an attorney named Grace. She'd heard me speak. Said she had a case, a young woman, 29, whose grandmother's estate had been stolen by a cousin using forged documents and fake witnesses. She doesn't want to go public, Grace said. But she's scared. And she needs someone who understands. I didn't hesitate. Have her email me. I'll walk her through the first 3 moves. No charge. Because this wasn't a business anymore. It was a reclamation line. And I would answer every single call it made that night. I opened the drawer labeled Final Documents and took out my updated will. I flipped to the back page, reread my own executor letter, and added one final sentence: and should any party attempt to erase this record, may they be met with the full and unrelenting weight of everything I've learned. I signed it. Dated it. Sealed it in a fireproof box. Then I poured myself a glass of wine, turned out the lights, and let the silence fall around me like armor. There's a moment, a very specific moment, when the fear disappears. Not because the danger is gone, but because you've studied it, mapped it, turned it into a formula you can dismantle piece by piece. That moment came to me on a Tuesday afternoon when I got a call from Sandra, the hospice nurse who had cared for my mom during her final weeks. She didn't know about the court case. She hadn't heard about Mason or the fraud or the lawsuit. She just called to say thank you. "I never told you this," she said, voice soft and worn, "but your mother talked about you constantly. Even when she couldn't remember what day it was, she always knew your name. Always." My throat tightened. Not from grief. From recognition, because I had spent so long thinking she betrayed me. But maybe she was just overwhelmed. Maybe Mason moved faster than her pain. Sandra continued. She said you had more backbone than anyone she knew. That if anything happened, you'd take care of it. I stared out the window, at the quiet lawn, the soft breeze moving through the wind chimes she hung 20 years ago, and I whispered, "I did, Mom. I took care of everything." That night, I opened the last of the storage boxes from the attic. It was filled with old journals, hers. I didn't expect to find much. She wasn't the type to document feelings. But I was wrong. In a faded green spiral-bound notebook, I found a page titled "If I Don't Get a Chance to Explain." Vanessa deserves the house. Not because she's the only one who stayed, but because she's the only one who knows how to keep something sacred. It wasn't signed. It wasn't dated. But it was in her handwriting. I took a photo of that page and printed it, framed it, and placed it above my office desk. Every time I consult another woman now, another daughter, another widow, another sister betrayed, I look at that frame before I speak. It reminds me that the fight wasn't just mine. It was inherited. And now, shared. I got a postcard last month from Elena, the mother I'd helped in that custody case. It had a photo of her and her son at a playground. On the back, one line, "Because of you, I didn't back down." That's what this is now. Not revenge. Inheritance in motion. There's power in systems. But there's more power in knowing where they fail, and being ready to fill the gaps. Women like me aren't anomalies. We're evidence. That betrayal can be met with strategy. That silence can be met with litigation. That let it go can be replaced with submit the affidavit. Sometimes people still ask me if I've talked to Mason. I haven't. That he moved again. New state. New alias online. I heard he tried to start a business, but it failed. Not because I did anything. I didn't have to. When your life is built on shortcuts, you eventually run out of road. I don't hate him anymore. He taught me more than he ever meant to, and now, every time I walk through the front door of the house he tried to steal, I know, I didn't just win. I became the kind of woman no one dares erase again. Grief changes shape over time at first. It was like a scream I couldn't voice, a sharp, raw, pulsing behind my ribs. Then it became a question, why me? Why her? Why this way? Now it's something else entirely, not a void. Not even sadness. More like a layer of cold steel beneath my skin. Not bitter. Just unbreakable. It's why, when I got the letter from the State Bar Review Board, I didn't panic. Mason had filed a complaint against Lynette. Claimed she coerced testimony, manipulated evidence, and defamed his character by referencing his text messages in public filings. Lynette called me laughing. I've been in law for 40 years, Vanessa. That boy is as dangerous as a wet napkin. Still, we filed a response. Attached every ruling. Every transcript. Every signature and submission. The bar dismissed the complaint within a week, but it confirmed something for me. He was still watching. Still trying to control the story. Even from a distance, that realization used to rattle me. Now it just affirms I'm still the one holding the pen. I updated my trust documents that night. Again. Added a medical directive. Named a neutral third-party financial executor. Attached all necessary passwords and encrypted backups, because no one will ever get the chance to exploit my decline the way Mason did hers. The next workshop I hosted, I added a new handout, Legacy Locks, Protecting Yourself from Inheritance. Tampering after 60. The women in the room, teachers, retired nurses, small business owners, took it in like gospel. They didn't ask questions about feelings. They asked about power, and when one of them, a soft-spoken widow named Helen, raised her hand and asked, "What happens if my son tries something like this?" I didn't sugarcoat it. You cut emotion out of the equation. You file. You freeze. You protect what you built, even if it means protecting it from blood. There was no applause. Just nods. Because they understood, these weren't women waiting to be saved. These were women waking up. I got another letter a few weeks later. This one wasn't from a court or a lawyer. It was handwritten. No return. Address. Inside was a single sentence, "You were never supposed to win." No signature. But I recognized the handwriting. Mason's. For a moment, I felt that familiar flicker of heat rise in my chest, the old urge to react, to engage, to burn it all down again, but instead, I smiled. Tossed the letter in the shredder. And whispered, I didn't just win. I rewrote the rules. Because the truth is, people like Mason don't know what to do when the woman they buried builds a courtroom on top of the grave. By the time the first anniversary of the final court ruling came around, I didn't feel the need to mark the date. There was no cake. No wine. No celebration, just a quiet sunrise, a walk through the garden, and the sound of my boots brushing the stone path I laid myself, because real victories don't echo. They settle, deep into your bones, where no one can steal them again. That morning, I opened my inbox to find something unexpected. A message from a woman named Rebecca Calloway, a journalist working on a feature for a national investigative podcast. The topic, How Women Reclaim What Was Stolen, the Silent Epidemic of Inheritance Theft. She wrote that she'd heard whispers about my case through the network of probate lawyers and elder care advocates. She wanted to know if I'd be willing to talk to them. My first instinct was no. I didn't want attention. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted quiet, but then I thought about Helen. About Elena. About all the women who walked into my office shaking, afraid, half convinced they were crazy, and left with folders, timelines, and permission to stop apologizing. So I said yes. Rebecca flew out 2 weeks later. She met me at the house, my house, and we sat in the office I built from the ashes of everything Mason tried to burn down. She asked questions. Real ones. Not just about the case, but about the emotions that came after. When did you stop feeling like the villain for standing up for yourself? I blinked. Because no one had asked that before. I think the day I realized the only people calling me a villain were the ones who benefited from my silence. She didn't say anything for a long time. Just nodded, writing slowly in her notebook. We recorded an interview. And when the episode came out, it went viral in the quietest, most powerful way possible. Thousands of comments. Thousands of downloads. Emails from strangers, daughters, grandmothers, stepchildren, even nurses who'd witnessed the same kind of fraud but never knew what to call it, and there it was again. That one word, erased, but now they weren't staying silent. They were fighting. And many of them were using my blueprint. It hit me, harder than any ruling ever had. This is what legacy actually means, not a house. Not money. Not revenge, but it's making sure the next woman doesn't have to fight quite as hard, because you cut the first path through the thorns. Rebecca's article ended with a quote from me I barely remembered saying, if they thought the will was the last word, they forgot one thing, I'm still alive. It printed in bold. And when I saw it, I didn't flinch. I felt calm. Settled. Permanent. Mason didn't respond. He couldn't. Because when the story belongs to you, the thieves go quiet. I didn't expect to hear from Geraldine, my mom's old neighbor, ever again. But one day, she showed up at my door with a tin of oatmeal cookies and a worn manila envelope. She looked smaller somehow. Age had curved her spine, but not her spirit. She smiled the way people do when they're about to say something they've carried for far too long. I was cleaning out my sewing room, she said, and found something your mom gave me to hold. I think it's time it comes home. Inside the envelope were 3 folded letters, a photograph of me at age 5, and a signed copy of my mother's original will, dated 5 years earlier. The one before Mason ever re-entered the picture. It wasn't legally relevant anymore. But to me, it was everything. It proved that my mother had chosen me long before cancer, confusion, and coercion had rewritten her wishes. It also proved that Mason had knowingly ignored it, because this version had my full name, and his, in black ink, with clear directives. Vanessa will inherit the property. Mason has been financially independent for years. Geraldine's hands trembled as she passed it over. She was scared, she whispered. Scared he'd find it. Scared he'd turn you against her. I closed the envelope gently. Not because I needed the contents to fight anymore. But because I understood something she never said out loud. Mom didn't betray me. She got cornered. Manipulated. Worn down by guilt and pain, and a son who had perfected the art of taking. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the old recliner she used to love, clutching that letter, and finally let the last piece of weight fall off my shoulders. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even cold. I was finished. The next morning, I built a small memory shelf in the front room. Not a shrine. Just a shelf. Her sapphire necklace. A framed quote she used to love, you were born with a voice. Don't die with it. Buried. And the photo Geraldine returned, with my 5-year-old face grinning in a flower crown. I didn't put up a plaque. Didn't share it on social media. Didn't explain it to anyone, because some things don't need an audience. They just need closure. A week later, I held my last estate workshop, at least for a while. It was the biggest one yet. 37 women, 3 attorneys, 2 elder care advocates, and 1 silent chair left open with a simple sign, for the woman who needed this 20 years ago. That seat wasn't just for my mother. It was for me. For all the women who'd sat in rooms they were never meant to leave empty-handed. For all the daughters who were told they were too emotional, too controlling, too dramatic, when really they were just the only ones telling the truth. After the event, one woman approached me in tears. Her voice shook when she said, "You made me realize I'm not crazy. I'm not cruel. I'm just tired of being erased." I nodded. Because I understood her better than anyone ever had. Then I said the one thing I wish someone had told me in the beginning: you don't owe them grace. You owe yourself the truth. I always thought justice would feel loud. Like a gavel slam. A headline. A moment when the world claps and says, you were right. But real justice is quiet. It doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives when you walk into your own house, turn the key, and no longer brace for someone to take it from you. I had learned to live in silence, not the kind born from fear, but from peace. From knowing I'd done everything I could. That I'd buried my mother, then resurrected her truth, and now, there was nothing left to defend, but the law. She keeps you sharp. And just when I thought I could rest, another letter came. This one from Mason's new attorney. Apparently, Mason had filed for bankruptcy. He wanted to settle the remainder of the restitution he owed me, at a reduced amount. Lynette reviewed the letter and called me, chuckling. He's trying to get you to feel bad for winning, she said. Do we settle? I asked. That's your call, she said. You already have the judgment. You can let him bleed slow or close the file. I took 24 hours to think, and in that time, I looked around the house, the garden, the office I'd built. I reread my mother's letter. I reviewed the donation receipts from the support groups I'd funded. I looked at the new thank you emails from women I'd never met, women across the country who had listened to my podcast episode or read the feature article and were now fighting their own versions of Mason. Then I wrote back, declined. The full judgment stands. He can pay me in pieces until he learns what that word means. Because forgiveness isn't always freedom. Sometimes it's permission. And Mason had lost that privilege long ago. The court upheld the original terms. His wages remained garnished. His assets, what little he hadn't hidden or wasted, stayed frozen, and just like that, the man who tried to cut me out of existence was now legally required to fund the life he tried to erase. Irony has a funny way of becoming justices. Shadowed out a few weeks later, I got an email from a woman named Celia, whose brother had manipulated their dying father into giving him power of attorney. She'd found my name on a legal resource board, downloaded my free strategy templates, and followed every step. Now her case was in court. And she was winning. She wrote, I don't know you, but you gave me a map through hell. Thank you for not staying quiet. I stared at that line for a long time. And for the first time in this entire journey, I let myself cry. Not out of anger. Not even from exhaustion. But from the sheer weight of being heard, because that was the root of it all, wasn't it? We weren't asking for pity. Or revenge. Or even fairness. We just wanted the truth to matter more than the lie. There's a rhythm to healing. It doesn't come in milestones. It comes in moments. Quiet ones. Private ones. Like realizing you haven't checked the locks 3 times before bed. Or waking up and feeling safe in your own house, not grateful, just safe. That's how I knew it was over, not because Mason was still paying me back. Not because the law had spoken. But because he no longer lived in my head. The house no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like home, and one night, while organizing some old court documents for a workshop, I came across the very first photo I took when I moved back after the final ruling. A single cardboard box on the floor. No furniture. Just me, standing in the middle of the room with nothing but determination and silence. I took that photo and hung it in the hallway. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful chapters start with absolutely nothing. Weeks later, I got invited to speak at a legal conference for estate litigators. At first, I said no. What did I have to say to a room full of lawyers? But Lynette called and said, they don't need another expert. They need a witness. So I went. The panel moderator introduced me like this: Vanessa Cole is not a lawyer. But she's what every lawyer should be afraid of, a woman who learned the system well enough to beat it at its own game. I took the stage and opened with the truth. I'm not here because I wanted to fight. I'm here because I had to. And now I teach other women how to make sure no one gets to rewrite their stories without a fight. The audience didn't clap. They just listened. And afterward, a senior partner from a prominent firm approached me and said, I've never lost a case to a civilian before. Now I hope I never have to face someone like you. I smiled. You already have. You just didn't recognize her. That night, I walked out of the hotel and called no one. I didn't need to tell anyone where I was. I wasn't reporting back. I wasn't justifying the win. I was living in it. A year ago, I had fought for my name on a will. Now, my name was on legal panels, podcast titles, and quiet thank you notes from women I'd never meet, Mason had once told me. You'll understand someday. He was right. I understood that some people only feel powerful when they can make others feel small. But I also understood how fast that illusion crumbles when the smallest person stands up, documents everything, and files a motion not to fight, but to reclaim, and when she wins, legally, strategically, relentlessly, there's no noise, just justice. By the second anniversary of the court ruling, my life had reshaped itself into something unrecognizable and undeniably mine. The house had become a quiet headquarters. Part home, part archive, part battlefield memorial. The wide days looked nothing like they used to. Mornings were for walks and coffee. Afternoons were filled with consultations, strategy calls, resource guides. And evenings were mine again, and no more checking court dockets. No more rereading legal codes until my eyes burned. Just music, soft lamplight, and the hum of peace that only arrives when every door is finally locked from the inside. Then, one morning, I got a package I didn't expect. No return address. Inside was a small wooden box. No letter. No explanation. Just the key to my mother's jewelry cabinet, the original one. The one that went missing the same week Mason had claimed ownership of the house. I hadn't even looked for it in months. Had assumed it was gone, pawned, sold, lost to one of his disappearing acts, but here it was. I opened the box with hands that didn't tremble. Inside, my mother's sapphire pendant. Her engagement ring, passed down from my grandmother. And a sticky note in her handwriting, for Vanessa. Always. That was it. No signature. No apology. No drama. That I didn't know if Mason had sent it. Or someone else. I didn't care. I took the pendant, held it to the light, and saw my reflection. In the cut of the stone. Not the girl who used to wait for approval. Not the daughter afraid to ask questions. Not the woman who begged the system to believe her, just me, clear-eyed, steel-spined, and untouched by anyone else's version of the truth. I placed the pendant back in its case and stored it in the fireproof safe, because some things are too sacred to wear. They're meant to be protected, not flaunted. That week, I also made a decision I never thought I would. I took a full-time job again. Not at the clinic. At a legal aid center for women navigating contested estates. They didn't care that I wasn't a lawyer. They cared that I knew exactly what to do. My title. Client strategy consultant, but what they really called me was the woman who teaches you how not to disappear. I walked into that office on my first day wearing my mother's ring on a chain around my neck, not as a memory. As a declaration that everything they tried to take, I reclaimed. And everything they thought I wouldn't survive, I now teach. I returned to the cemetery for the first time in 2 years. Not on a holiday. Not on her birthday. Just on a Tuesday, because grief doesn't run on a calendar. It arrives when the wind hits a certain way. When the tea steeps too long and reminds you of her. When your own silence mirrors the silence she left behind. I brought no flowers. Just a folded copy of the court's final judgment. And her original handwritten will, now preserved in acid-free paper. I laid them on the grass beside her stone. Not as proof. But as punctuation. You weren't erased, I whispered. Not on my watch. It wasn't closure I came for. It was acknowledgement. That we were both manipulated. That she had fought in her own way, quietly, imperfectly. And I had finished the fight she didn't get the chance to start. I left the papers there for 10 minutes. Let the wind touch them. Then packed them back into my case file and drove home. That night, I slept with the windows open. No alarms. No contingency plans. Just the cool breeze of nothing left to lose. Mason? Last I heard, he'd moved again. Changed jobs. Probably still telling his version of the story to anyone who'll listen, but the difference now, I don't care, because The law knows. The record knows. And I know that I won. Not in court, though I did. Not in money, though I reclaimed that too. But in identity. In voice. In the cold, permanent fact that I never raised my voice, and still silenced him completely. I kept the house. Not as a monument. But as a foundation. Where I now help other women do what I did, refuse to vanish, and if that makes me the villain in someone else's version of the story, so be it, because the truth doesn't need permission. It just needs a spine. And a paper trail. They took my name off the will. But what they really tried to take was my voice. My place. My right to exist in the narrative of my own family. For a while, it worked. I questioned everything, my memory, my role, my worth. When the people you trust the most betray you, it's not just pain. It's disorientation. You walk through your own life like a stranger, unsure which version of you was ever real, but silence, I've learned, is only powerful when you're scared of it. And once I sat in that silence long enough, studied it, made peace with it, I realized something terrifying and liberating. I didn't need anyone's permission to fight. I didn't have to scream. Didn't have to prove I was a good daughter, or a loyal sister, or a calm woman. All I needed were the facts, the receipts, and the will to keep going when everyone expected me to fold. Revenge wasn't the goal. Correction was. I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted to erase the lie. And rebuild the truth with my own hands. Along the way, I stopped needing the closure I once begged for. Because closure is overrated. Power is quieter than that. Power is knowing you were right, even if no one claps. It's watching the people who tried to erase you fade into silence, while you remain. I used to think family was sacred. Now I know, family isn't defined by blood or history. It's defined by who protects your name when you're not in the room. In the end, it wasn't about the house. It was about standing in that house, whole, legal, and unshakably myself. And saying, you don't get to decide who I am. And when I looked around at the women I've helped since, the daughters, the widows, the sisters clawing their way back from silence, I understood something sacred. I didn't just survive. I paved a road. Now, when they ask me what I'd say to Mason if I ever saw him again, I don't hesitate. I wouldn't say anything. I just hand him the court order, and walk right past, because I didn't win with fire. I won with paper. And the truth has never burned so clean.